Very welcome to a conversation with Professor Virginia Dignum and Assistant Professor Stefan Lindholm on AI and ethics. My name is Jesper Kronhamn and I am chaplain here at Umeå campus, where we have both SLU, Swedish University of Agricultural Science, and Umeå University. And I would say to all participants that this event is recorded, so you may end up on a YouTube film from Studentpastorns channel. And we have made advertisement for this a bit all over Sweden, so it would be interesting to hear from where you are sitting, where in Sweden, or if you are abroad. So if please write in the chat where in Sweden or abroad you are, just for seeing where this information has went. So Virginia Dignum, you are a professor at computing science at Umeå University and has a Wallenberg chair on responsible artificial intelligence. Mm-hmm. And the French digital web agency IPFC has released their list of the top 50 AI influencers 2020, and you were among these 50.
Seems so, yes.
Yeah. And you have written, among other things, the book Responsible Artificial Intelligence.
Yes. Oh, wow.
Yeah. And yes. Stefan Lindholm, your assistant professor, lector in systematic theology at Johannelund's teologiska högskola in Uppsala, and has research grants in AI and ethics. And I have heard that you are also writing a book, Hur smart kan en maskin bli? How clever could a machine be? And as I understood it, it's written but not published.
Yes, it's still in progress.
Yeah.
We will see if it will survive this conversation. Maybe I have to make a lot of revisions.
Yeah, but I mean, it's good. So we will first hear a presentation from both Virginia and Stefan on the topic AI and ethics. And then I will ask some questions and you will have a discussion asking each other questions. And we will end with questions from the audience. And after that, we will have discussions in small groups in breakout rooms where we could discuss how much more clever we have been during this event. Yeah. So with no further ado, I may give the word to Virginia. And
sure.
You present the topic AI and ethics.
Yes, thank you. Let me just start my presentation and share my screen. Yes. So just before I start, I'm not an ethicist, I'm not a philosopher, I'm an engineer. I build AI systems and I have been doing so for more than 30 years now. So long before the whole current hype on AI, I have been working on it, many different types of techniques and methods. But I'm mostly someone who builds these things and who are very interested, and that's where most of my research lays on understanding what is the impact on people, on organizations, and in society in general by the fact that we are interacting and using this type of systems that are supposedly intelligent. And I would like to start by, before we talk about AI and ethics, or before we talk about responsible AI, as I prefer to call it, and I will explain in a minute why, just start by thinking, what is AI? And there are as many definitions of AI, or maybe even more definitions of AI than people working on AI. But basically, it refers to a type of systems, computer systems, which, given a set of objectives, can make some kind of predictions or recommendations about these systems. This can be done in many, many different ways. Currently, we see a lot of ways which are based on what we call machine learning, and that is basically a data-driven approach. So we make computers analyze huge amounts of data and try to find patterns on that data in order to identify what those patterns are, and if those patterns can say something about the future. But that's only one of the many techniques we have in AI. And AI is definitely not just about algorithms and not just about the machine learning techniques that we talk about. An algorithm is indeed something which we use in AI, but we use algorithms in any computer system, and we use algorithms every day in our lives. An algorithm is not more nor less than a recipe to get to a certain result. So if you are baking an apple pie, you are using an algorithm, the recipe to go to make that apple pie. And the result of the apple pie has a little bit to do with the algorithm, but it has also a lot to do with the choice that you make in terms of ingredients, and also the choice that you make in terms of who is building and who is involved in the building or the baking of this apple pie. So if you look at AI systems, and why do we at this moment care a lot about AI systems, and everybody's discussing AI in the last 7 to 5 years, and before that it was something hardly spoken outside of research or outside of technology. It's because these systems increasingly are able to take decisions autonomously, and that means that there is no one pushing the button for the system to do something. The systems are able to take decisions or to take action by themselves. They do that in interaction with us. They act in our environments, they act in our lives, they make decisions which can potentially change our lives by deciding whether or not we get a credit card, whether or not we get a mortgage, what type of diseases or diagnostics are there for the diseases, the symptoms that we have, and all kinds of ways these systems are interacting with us. And moreover, they are learning, they are adapting, because they are able increasingly to use the information and the decisions that they made in the past in order to improve somehow those decisions. So that's what makes these systems intelligent, and that's also what makes these systems a focus of concern or a focus of attention at the moment. What we cannot forget is these things are software systems, are pieces of program that someone somewhere put together. Probably a lot of people in a lot of places using a lot of different techniques, but they have been built by people. And they don't exist. They are not magic. They don't come out of the sky and drop on us, and the only thing we can do is look at them and see what happens and hope that they will not take over our lives or whatever science fiction and the media makes us believe. But they are really pieces of software that someone somewhere built. So they are not alone, and they are part of what we call a social technical system. There are people who build them, there are people who use them, there are people who regulate them, there are people who monitor them, there are all types of organizations, public and private, involved in this system. So when we talk about responsibility or ethics in AI, we are not just looking at the software, we are looking at this social technical system around the software. Because AI is not intelligent at all. It's as stupid as you can have it. It is extremely brittle, is extremely focused on a specific type of problems. And yes, we can make these problems very broad. Yes, we can make these problems, can make AI systems who can handle many different problems, but there are very big limits to what these systems can do. You can train a system to identify school buses very nicely, but the moment that you turn the school bus into some strange position, the system goes completely out of its own capabilities. And this happens again and again. There is actually a whole field of research at this moment exactly trying to crash or to trick AI systems into doing strange things, because then we can learn what are the limitations of what we are doing. And this one, maybe it's not the most interesting, but if you look that if you put a sticker on a stop sign somewhere, or you put the stop sign in Umeå and then let snow go on top of it, it's extremely difficult for the AI system to be able to interpret that system. And then the responsibility of using this type of software in, for instance, a self-driving car is not of the car. The car is doing, the software in the car is doing as best as it can to find the patterns on that system. And the lot of the responsibility is ours who've developed these systems, ours who sell these systems, and ours who regulate or allow or not this type of systems in our roads. So the responsibility are much more than just making systems that are as accurate as possible in interpreting images or interpreting sounds or interpreting data in one way or another. So responsible AI is about mostly considering the question, what should an AI system be doing? Potentially it can do a lot, and there are great examples of a lot of very good things that we can do with AI systems. The question for us is, should it be doing it? And then the question is, who is deciding? Is that the engineer? Is that the government? Is that everybody? Is that the big tech companies, which are the ones who are pushing forward one type of systems or another? Which value should be considered as we decide what, when, and how and where do we want to use AI? Is that economic values? Is that human rights? Is that a combination of the two? How we deal with dilemmas when we cannot have all prioritize all the values, which ones should we prioritize? And again, who should be involved in this discussion? Who should decide? And who should participate? And which voice count and which voice don't count? So responsible AI is not only about the ethics of AI, ensuring that AI decisions and development are aligned with human rights, with ethical values, with societal principles, but it's also about ensuring that AI is first and foremost lawful, is aligned with whatever decisions and procedures that we take are things which can be done legally within the legal system of the country or of the region. It's also about designing systems that are reliable. And this is a very technical point. It's about designing systems that don't crash, that don't have bugs, or at least that we have some process to deal with those bugs. It's about designing systems that are stable and robust. It's also about considering who is going to benefit from these systems and how is this benefits being divided, and also again from a very technical perspective is about being able to verify that indeed the system is ethical, that indeed the system is legal, that indeed the system is reliable, and so on. So really putting the computational guarantees that what we're doing is indeed what we say we are doing. So if you go back to this idea of the systems, the social technical system around a piece of software that it's autonomous, adaptable, and interactive, what we want to do is what we call art. And it's ensuring that if the system is autonomous, there is somewhere a process of responsibility for the so I'm having an echo, maybe someone has anyway, it seems to be gone. So it's about if the system is autonomous, somewhere there should be a responsibility for the decisions and the actions that this system takes. And that's probably not the software, because software is just a piece of code. It's an institution, an organization, a person who takes that responsibility. It's about accounting for what it does, explaining, and also having ways, processes to redress and to ask for a compensation if the system goes wrong. And if the system is adaptable, it's also about understanding, having some level of openness about what is the system adapting to, why is the system adapting, and how is what have been the requirements and the assumptions that have been made as we build these systems. Because we need to check and to decide, and this is not a decision that AI is taking, is a decision that we people need to take about which are the decisions we want systems to take, about our plans or about our goals, about our intentions or about our actions, about me or about the whole group, benefiting me or benefiting us, ensuring that I already talked about the priorities and the dilemmas between values, but also realizing that in many cases, and this changes with time, with cultures, with the places and so on, what is morally or ethically acceptable is not always what is socially accepted. It's not the easy thing to do, but it's also not always allowed to be the laws. Not all laws are ethical, not all ethics are laws, and none of them are all the time socially accepted. Think about slavery in the past, think about capital punishment still now in many different countries is somewhere in a different place in this space. Think about also things like smoking in public, or the way we deal with eating animal meat, or animal welfare. All those things change completely where depending where you are in the world and which time, now or in the past. Just a few cases, but I think we don't have so much time. We can have these ones in the discussion. So taking responsibility in AI is not just about ensuring that AI systems behave ethically, but so that's what we call a responsibility or ethics by design. But it's about also looking at in the design, so looking at the process by which we develop these systems, and also looking at who is involved in the development of the system. So it's about by design, in design, and for the design. And for all these type of areas, there are different ways to approach it. And actually here in Umea, in my group, we are looking at many different possibilities to deal with these different aspects. Fortunately, it's not something which is only me or only our group here. It's increasingly recognized at all levels, at governmental levels, at United Nations. I'm working currently with the UNICEF. I'm working with the OECD and the G7 group of countries. The European Union has put up some guidelines for trustworthy AI. Engineering Association, the largest in the world, the IEEE, has come up with principles for ethics. So there is a lot of steps being done in ensuring that governments and regions really are taking the steps that are needed to understand what this is, and starting a dialogue of how are we as a country or as a region dealing with responsibility in AI. And I think I will stop, because these AI principles are for us, are not for the software, are not for the system. It's really for us as people, as organizations, as institutions. We really need to deal on how we are taking account of this. Because AI is not magic. AI is a tool, is an artifact that we make. So we people set the purpose. AI systems can give us a lot of answers, but if we are not asking the right questions, then the answers will not be very useful. And like I say, AI can do a lot, but we really need to start the discussions at societal level about how and what should AI be doing. Thank you.
Very much. Thank you very much, Virginia. Very interesting. Now the word go to Stefan.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Virginia, very much for that flyover of this huge topic. Just going to make sure you can see. Can you see what I see?
Yes.
Good. Hopefully that is true as well, that you see what I see. I'm going to do another flyover of this topic, and I left out some parts that I just assumed that Virginia would include, and I was quite right, it seems. So thank you again. My perspective is more obviously not from the technical side. I'm a trained theologian and philosopher, and I have done some research in the technical literature and tried to make sense to the best of my ability. My approach is more from the philosophy of mind and ethics, more academically. So I'm gonna maybe give some other perspectives that would complement and give other complementary perspectives. Let's see here if I can get this done. So the first question is maybe, why care? Why care about this? Well, here is a picture of, you perhaps know where it is, Silicon Valley, where much of this is developed as we speak. But many of the questions that are raised in conjunction with artificial intelligence and new emerging technologies raise also old questions, like the old Greek philosophers asked. So that is really where my interest comes from, is the old questions that come in a new form. But then again, as Virginia rightly pointed out, we shouldn't be swept away by this upsurge, this summer of AI, but think clearly about it. AI is apparently here, and it's here to stay, and it's made a lot of impact already, and will continue to do so in our life. Here's just a very unfinished list of things where it does affect us. And the list could go on for quite a long time. Just generally about the relationship between theology and ethics, there are certainly, one should begin with, benefits that are not ethically problematic, but ethically demanding, that we should do certain things when we have a technological possibility. For instance, alleviate suffering, poverty, and it can prevent death even. So if we have a technology, there are many cases where it's not just beneficial, it's also an obligation to use it. And it also increases well-being, comfort, and saves us time. It makes our life more fun at times. So those are some of the very good benefits and important benefits. But it also raises questions, problems. The most obvious one is that technologies, and it seems like it doesn't really matter almost what kind of technology, but any kind of technology can become a potential instrument of harm, depending on how it's construed and what it is for, to humans, to the animals, and to the planet. But it also raises new ethical questions that we haven't really thought too much about, or didn't have the need to do. One area that is sort of a precursor of technological AI ethics is bioethics. When we suddenly were able to keep people alive for longer, when should we stop the machine to keep people alive? That's a new kind of question that we didn't have, and that technology sort of gave us. And artificial intelligence is no exception to this general scheme of the relationship between technology and ethics. There are both benefits, obligations when we have it, I would say, but there are also potential problems. Some of them are clear, some of them are not so clear. So I would perhaps start by saying this, and this is repeating some of the things, or echoing some of the things Virginia just said. It seems like many of the issues comes from an increased autonomy with machines that leads to new ethical challenges. So it's important to make the right priorities, therefore, to how to develop in the mid and the long-term future. And I'm very happy to see all this fascinating work that Virginia has just given us a little glimpse into. Because we want machines and their actions to align with human values, to cooperate with us and not replace us. There are certainly people who think that replacement is not a bad idea, it's maybe a good idea. Those are not generally in AI research, but they are in dialogue with AI research and results, is what we call transhumanism, for instance. There are many ethical issues, and I'm not going to go into it, but we have to weigh moral principles. Here are the principles that Virginia knows quite well. You could use other principles as well, but there are moral principles which we have to use. And we also have to take a stance on how do we decide what a good action is if we're going to implement it? How do we justify ethics? And I think we have to think a little bit more about what we call a meta-ethical question. That is, how do we ground our beliefs and ideas about what is right? So one of the things is moral psychology. What goes on in a human being when she makes a certain decision? And in an analog to that would be what goes on in the machine when it makes some kind of autonomous moral decision. So there's some kind of an analogy there between those. I would say there are easier cases and there are complex, harder cases. I'm not saying there are easy cases at all, but there are easier, less hard. Self-driving cars, I think, is a very good thing if it could happen. It would save us 1 million lives a year globally, and many more from being hurt in traffic, and so on. There are complex, thorny questions like taking care of the elderly, raising and educating children. That's maybe far off. And you see my list, it goes on and becomes more and more complex. These are ethical questions that are not so easily solved. And I think there is another one that is not easy to put in. It's just a general feeling we have that there's a general fear of losing our human uniqueness and value when we talk about AI, and especially autonomous AI, then when it starts to take over or do the things that we used to do as human beings. Just very quick then, to show that Christians are not on another planet, but on this planet as well. As a Christian, I believe that God has created us in his image, and technology is one of the ways that we reflect our being created in God's image. Christians is also aware that things can go wrong. We just call it sin. And technology is one of the ways, it's not the only way, but one of the ways that it can go wrong. We call it that it replaces God, and we dominate other people, other species on the planet, and so on. In the Christian tradition, there is also the idea that God has, and we have, a responsibility to do something about this problem. God has saved us, it's redemption, by renewing this status of being created in the image of God. And therefore the technology, or the use of technology, can therefore be saved and used to serve humanity and creation, and not replace and dominate instead. So in other words, just very quickly, Christian ethics converges with an instrumental view of AI and a true and responsible view of AI. I have a couple of more minutes. Is that okay if I go on just a little bit?
Yes.
Jesper, yeah.
Do that.
Okay. Alan Turing was one of the early pioneers in computer science and also precursor to AI. He said this: I believe that at the end of the 20th century, I'm just going to see if I can see the whole, there we go. End of the 20th century, the use of words and the general educated opinion would have altered so much that one will be able to speak of machines thinking without expecting to be contradicted. What Turing here says is that the general opinion about machines, AI, will change, so that our common way of talking about them will have changed. Not that we have perhaps gained any new insight, but it's become a part of our cultural legacy. So he's predicting how we will perceive them. It's one of the many famous Turing quotes. So I just had to have a Turing quote in here. But what would an argument for thinking machinery look like? And I'm just going to really fly over. I'm not going to say anything substantial about it. Here's another one looking at us. Is Margaret Bowden, cognitive scientist, who's noted that issues about intelligence, consciousness, and therefore also morality are not scientific questions, natural scientific, you might add, but philosophical ones. We need careful arguments, not just unexamined intuitions. But such arguments, she adds, shows that there are no unchallengeable answers to these questions. That's because the concepts involved are themselves highly controversial. So all this talk about intelligence, all this talk about morality, are issues that cannot fundamentally be determined by modern science, it seems. It has to be renegotiated every generation. What is it to think? What is it to do the right action? It's perennial questions that have been the domain of philosophers. And without thinking about it, we express these things, and then we can thematize this and become a philosophy student and so on. But these are general questions that we just have to ask ourselves. Human and machine cooperation, social AI systems interact with us, and is the study of how we can interact beneficially with machines. Effective computing is connected to this, and it models our emotional and social attitudes and implements them in AI systems. And Virginia is going to say more about this, I hope, in a moment. But it presupposes, and this is my concern perhaps, it presupposes our inborn ability to attribute to other human beings cognitive value and moral standing, but also non-human entities, from fictional characters in books to toys when we're kids, to deities, you might think, and to machines. So social AI is not merely assisting humans, but it also challenges the way we perceive and interact with technologies and ourselves. And it's important to be aware of this. We are today quite comfortable with talking and attributing many human characteristics to AI systems. So has Turing's prophecy been fulfilled 70 years ago? I'm not going to talk at all about how smart a machine going to be. Here's just a very playful thing, way of illustrating it from Max Tegmark's book. But I'm just going to end with this note and then a quote, if I may, from Virginia, which I think shows that we're very much on the same page. On general intelligence, that is human-level intelligence, as far as I can see, there are a few ways of thinking about this. And I think Virginia and I are in quite agreement about this. Some think that it's a desirable and attainable goal of AI research, that we should do it and it's possible. Some think it's a non-desirable, although attainable goal. We could do it, but we shouldn't. Some think it is desirable, but it is, but it is in fact not an attainable goal. Some think it's going to happen, but it's not really going to happen. And perhaps another variety of that is a pseudo goal, not part of serious AI research. I, for one, is somewhere at the bottom of this list. But I'm just going to end with this quote I found today by Virginia, if I may. And this is on AGI, on when AI is going to, whether it's going to be as smart as we are at the moment. And she says this: AI achieved a main milestone when AlphaGo defeated Le Sedol. So this is the ancient Chinese game of Go, and AlphaGo, a computer, defeated Le Sedol, the world champion, at the game of Go. For me, Virginia says, the most important moment in that game is the image of the moment Lee realizes he would lose. His expressions of powerlessness, unbelief, sadness says a lot. Next to him was AlphaGo, a computer. It had no notion of what winning or losing meant. In fact, it was not even aware it was playing a game. It was just following instructions and optimizing some utility functions. Don't get me wrong, the technological advance was enormous, even more so because it exposed how far we are from artificial consciousness, end quote. And thank you, Virginia, for that quote.
And thank you, Stefan. I think we could look forward to a very interesting discussion from these two presentations. I thought I should start my few questions to you with starting in your books. I think that Virginia has said quite a lot of responsible AI, but if I may ask you to maybe summarize what you said in your presentation, I would like to ask, what is the key to develop and use AI in a responsible way? That's maybe to ask for a summary of what you just recently said. So now we don't hear.
Sound.
Yeah, sorry, I had my sound off. Thank you for the question, and I'm not sure if I can summarize the summary that I gave in my presentation. But one thing, and referring also to this last part of Stefan's presentation on AGI or general intelligence, and also to the quote from Turing on the use of words, it's extremely important to understand the power of words. When we talk about general artificial intelligence, or when we talk about artificial intelligence in general, and by we I mean the computer scientists and the engineers that are doing it, we talk about intelligence as knowing, as the cognitive ability of doing something. We exclude from that definition all types of other forms of human intelligence, social intelligence, emotional intelligence, the capacity to just to exist, to breathe, to the biological intelligence that we have. And we just consider the possibility of knowing stuff. And indeed, we can make machines who know more and more and who know better than us. I will trust my calculator in my telephone 100 times more than any of you to calculate to me the square root of 3. And that thing, no one will consider it intelligent nowadays. But we can make machines that know a lot about a lot of things. And that is when we talk about AGI, where we are meaning it. And it's very far from understanding or to creating machines that are human in all the multifaceted capacities of intelligence that humans have. So I think that the first thing about responsible intelligence is really to understand this, that when we talk about AI, we are talking about machines that can do things for us, solve problems for us, knowing stuff. Not about machines that can be emotionally. There are, of course, work on those things, but it's not the general idea about what AI is about at this moment.
I really agree with you. And someone said that the word artificial in artificial intelligence is true, that it is. Yeah. Okay, so Stefan, you are also, now you are on the way to write a book, you said. And the title was Hur smart kan en maskin bli? How smart could a machine be? Should you try to answer that question anyhow, even though you said something that you wouldn't answer that question? Now I'm asking it to you.
Right. Well, I think first of all, I think we're in such a fundamental agreement that machines cannot attain human level intelligence, because there's. But my reason would be, maybe I'm just developing what Virginia said. It's the whole array of human cognitive abilities that makes us human, and we have no way. We don't really know how to model all of those abilities and putting together in the way that they are put together in us. We can hone in on one or two of these abilities, like perception. So when you go through customs in the airport, if we are ever allowed back into airports, the face scanning is much better than the man or woman sitting in the boot next to it nowadays. So it's honing in on certain things, and on some levels they are smarter than us, but on this overall holistic picture of what it means to be an intelligent agent, we have no idea what it means, and we can't agree on a complete list of what abilities should be on that list. Certainly social, and to be social and to be like us, some sort of inner life, some sort of consciousness, self-awareness needs to be there too. And I think for various reasons that's impossible. So not even I would even go so far that I would square bracket intelligence in artificial intelligence because of the power of words. I talked to one of the experts in one of the big companies who's an AI expert recently, and we were also in fundamental agreement. And he said that it would be much better to have another word for it. Optimizing strategies, information technology, and be more specific what it is about, because it's different for different applications.
Definitely, yeah. And what is important to realize is that the machine has no idea of what it's doing. It can indeed recognize face better than us in a very specific context. There is the whole discussion, current discussion on ethics and racism and AI starts there. A well-known AI scientist who is black, and is a female black, which makes her especially more unlikely to be part of data sets, realized when she bought the last version of an Apple telephone that she could not unlock the telephone with her face. Because her face was black and her face was female. And the combination of female and black was not enough in whatever training set that Apple had made for that algorithm. So it's the machine can indeed quicker than a person there at the airport recognize faces and whatever, but within the very specific context of whatever faces have been given to it to train as examples, and still has no idea of what is face. There are examples of, and like I said, there is this whole research area at the moment trying to understand or to trick AI into doing stupid things, which is quite funny, but that teaches us a lot. And it discovered, for instance, that AI can very easily distinguish in pictures between dogs, huskies, and wolves. No, sorry, between dogs and wolves, or dogs and huskies, something like that. And what the machine was doing was counting the amount of white in the pictures, because huskies or the wolves or whatever it was are usually pictured on a white background of snow, and other dogs are pictured in some other background. So the machine had no idea of what was a dog, what was a husky, what was a wolf or whatever, but it became very good at identify white in pictures. It gets worse. We have already in many hospitals used AI to help diagnosis, and there are a lot of progress being done on using AI to identify cancer cells of many different types. What happens is that, and here shows again the lack of context of which these systems are, and these are examples, but it's something which is inherent in the way that the systems are built. So in this cancer cell example, if a doctor suspects that you might have some type of cancer, it will probably send you to a better scan or X-ray or whatever MRI machine than if it just does it as a control, because it thinks, yeah, let's take the, and then all these images get into a big data set of images. And AI is very good at correlating more resolution in the pictures with the likelihood of having cancer. So it's at a certain moment not looking at the image anymore at all, only looking at the level of resolution. Because there is all those people who had more likelihood to have a cancer were sent to machines with higher resolution and other ones not. So it's not really doing nothing more than confirming that the doctor was right sending those pictures or those persons to a better resolution machine. So again, AI doesn't understand what it's doing, and it's up to us as people to provide this context. And so the whole issue of responsibility is the responsibility that we have to understand the context, and at the same time then take the responsibility for using the AI in that context. You start with the example as well of the self-driving cars, which is indeed easy. Yes, we have self-driving. We can put a self-driving car in wherever we want. We can indeed use image recognition in many different cases. It's not so much a question at this moment, an issue of technology. It's much more an issue of responsibility, of legal, and also of a discussion of how good and how acceptable is that these things are going to make errors. Every technology makes errors.
Yeah.
And what is the level of error that we find acceptable as a society? There will never be a self-driving car which will be 100% perfect. Like there is nothing, we are not 100% perfect. The discussion is, do we want to put these cars knowing that they will make some mistakes, but probably much less mistakes than what we do, and what do we find acceptable? So it's much more a legal or a societal question than a technological one.
I have a AI ethical question that may be very tricky, but Stefan referred to you, Virginia, when you presented when the AI AlphaGo Zero beated the world champion Go player Lee Sedol. And that AI system wasn't trained on any data set from human experts. It was only given the basic rules in Go, and then it trained itself.
Yes and no. There were many different versions of that AlphaGo. The AlphaZero, indeed, it's a lot of the power of words. Of course, that thing didn't start with the empty white file with no instructions or nothing at all, and start all of a sudden.
The basic rules. Yeah.
It had rules, and it basically what it did, it generated 1 billion possible games and played them all. So it creates the data for itself. So we didn't give it the data, but it generated 1 million games, and with all kinds of possible outcomes, all possible types of possible steps or not, according to the rules. So it did play did generate those games as they would have, could have been played, and then it literally played 1 billion games.
Yes.
I wonder if Lee Sedol would have in his life the possibility to play a billion games himself, how fair the game between the AlphaGo and Lee Sedol would have been.
Yeah, but if we apply this computer strength to ethics, my question to you two is it possible to imagine that one could give the basic rules to an AI system that find its own way in ethics, or do we have to give them more robot ethics that are more like Isaac Asimov's first 3 robot laws, where the ethics will be more rule-based ethics?
Isaac Asimov wrote his books as fiction, and they should be understood as fiction. The rules of the Isaac Asimov rules, if anything, the books show that those rules don't work, because it always, the robots got into big problems in the book. So and we got into even bigger problems. In theory, we could indeed, if we have the basic rules of ethics, we can build systems to learn those rules. But do we have those basic rules of ethics? We did some time ago in my group a small exercise with building self-driving cars, fake virtual self-driving cars, following the utilitarian rules, following Kantian rules, or following virtue ethics rules. And the cars would take completely different decisions. A utilitarian car would count how many people were in the car or in the outside and just take the pure mathematic. Those ones are very easy to program. They just count stuff and they decide which is the best. A car based on Kantian rules is not so much about the results, it's much more about the actions that it takes, and it should be able to reason about the goodness of the actions. So, and it would probably not deviate from its set of action if and again, we were very black and white, and we are not ethicists, but taking it black and white, a Kantian approach would mean that the car would not deviate from its set plan if it knew that by deviating from that plan it would cause any harm, even if it was harm to a chicken instead of harm to the people sitting inside the car, things like that. If you go back to the virtues, it's you would get other types of results. So which ethics, which rules are we going to give the machines to learn from? And we all know that we all are extremely, and the good of being people, and I think that's what is very important, and with what technology shows us again and again, is that our imperfections as persons are exactly what makes us the persons, what makes us different from any other type of technology. And a world in which there are no imperfections is not a world where none of us wants to live, I think.
Yeah.
And we get into those dystopic worlds so we really have to realize that by being imperfect, we really are creating the most perfect, with all the mess that we create as people, but still is it's more perfect than a world without the imperfections.
Yeah, I fully agree. So if I give the same question to Stefan, what would you say?
Well, I would say that one could perhaps in theory and in practice implement these rules, but if they're going to interact with us, they have to do it in a way that is recognizable to us. I mean, a perfect utilitarian, you don't want to have them around. They're dangerous, positively dangerous. They're going to run you straight over, depending on what they want to maximize. So save all human beings might, if you put in the wrong values, might mean that they put every human out, because then you take away the problem. It's one way of problem solving it. So it's very much a technical problem, of course, but I would say something that a computer system doesn't have is vulnerability, or an awareness of its own vulnerability. It's weaknesses, that it has a finite life, and that a finite life is a bad thing, or sort of death is a threat to me. All these things is what makes our lives valuable. Many other things as well, which makes it hard for a computer to understand itself as such an agent. It might perceive others as that kind of agent. Yeah. So these are just some of the examples. But from my money, I would say that since a computer or an AI system cannot be self-conscious in a human-like manner, it cannot be fully ethical. It can mimic and simulate parts of what it means to be ethical. But that's also always a derivative and an extension of human. It's like you say that the scissor cuts, but it's actually you who cuts. It's an instrument. Even it cannot rise above an instrumental value. We might attribute more to it. We might start to perceive it as an agent in its own right, and like it more than human beings, maybe in a not too far future, because they're easier to be around, or whatever. So I think there are so many other issues that are, first of all, hard to program, I suppose, but hard to conceptualize more fundamentally.
Thank you. So I think the most interesting thing is when you speak to each other. So we have said that you should ask some questions to one another, and I think we should go into that phase. Maybe Stefan wants to start to. We could maybe take one question in each direction.
Is it yes and no questions, right?
Okay.
Well, just a teaser then. Do you, Virginia, think that politicians and the general stakeholders and audience today are sufficiently informed to make good decisions about AI technology, and how can we ensure that to be the case in the future?
It's a yes and no question. No, they are not, but no one is, not even the engineers.
So where's the sufficiency condition for
the sufficiency condition is to realize that it's a question that needs to be answered by a whole bunch of disciplines at the same time. There is not one group of people who can answer this question.
But let me specify. Do you think politicians today are far behind, or are they approaching where they should be?
Depending on the politician, depending on the country, depending on a lot of things, and so. Yes. But I see a general interest from politicians to realize that they need to be more informed. Mm-hmm. You see that in this latest group that I'm working with, yes. The GPI, the Global Partnership on AI, which has been launched by. I think at this moment there are like 20 countries involved. I actually was talking with the Swedish government just recently about whether or not Sweden should join it. So there is an overall feeling from politicians that it is something that they should be considering, but not all of them are doing that very seriously or very, taking all the necessary steps. If I might ask you something back, I didn't know about your book before Jesper just refers to it, or at least I didn't know the title of it, but I see that you chose to call it machines being smart and not machines being intelligence.
Right.
What you see in the difference between those two?
Well, smartness is basically computational functions, I suppose. Being able to find the quickest maximizing a goal, or quickest path to a certain goal. Intelligence and understanding, wisdom, all these things are much broader concepts and also much more fundamental concepts. I mean, for a philosopher, that's what they are.
Yeah.
I would say that an AI system cannot conceptualize, and that's a bit controversial. Because we say that they have a concept of what they think or they know. I don't think it can even, a calculator cannot calculate, because calculating requires conceptualization.
Yeah.
And I think that a purely material thing cannot conceptualize anything. It requires something more than matter. So I'm not a naturalist. I could be an emergentist. I could be something more, but I'm not a pure naturalist. And that's my take. Thank you for that. That's a good question. Yeah. I think too many people throw the intelligence and smartness in the same category.
Yeah. I fully agree with you. And I think if anything, we are trying to build machines which are smart in one way or another.
Yeah.
Then we are looking at intelligence. But in another way, and I think you mentioned that, or you approached that briefly in your presentation, we can use AI or this type of systems that we are building, or that we are aiming to build or hoping to build, to get us a better understanding of what it means to be human. So, and that is kind of the original idea of AI by Turing, and also by the guys at the Dartmouth meetings, was about developing computational techniques to let us understand what it means to be intelligent or to be human by derivation. Do you think that that's the case, or are we just building some yet another technique like a car or a train or whatever?
I think the first. I mean, I think we're just building a machine. I think the original romantic ideas are philosophically naive. I mean, I think AI research and philosophy of mind and cognitive science, I mean, these all interact, and empirical psychology as well, if you want. Like, they all have a behaviorist legacy to deal with. Turing was quite clearly a behaviorist, and which means that input and output are completely correlated in a system. and then you know everything there is to know about it. I think when I read some AI literature by experts and by the popularized stuff, I see hints of this here and there all the time.
Mhm.
It might be a slip of tongue. It might just be a parlance. That's the way you talk as AI. But I think this is a philosophical naivete that AI researchers still have to be much more aware of, because it's, as you said, I mean, the power of words, definitely.
And one thing which is important to realize is that still by far and large AI researchers or AI developers are engineers. We build stuff.
Yeah.
And then we build it, and then we see what we can do with it. That's basically the definition of an engineer. First we build, and then you think about what it can be done. And a lot of what you see in AI comes from this type of approach. We can build it, so we will build it. Why not?
Yeah, I mean,
then we'll see where it gets us.
Exactly. So should we question this? It's
lost,
secondary, or yeah.
And if you see that it's increasing the awareness also in engineering curricula to push students to start thinking about these should questions, but it's still, and in many cases you hear that from developers and engineers again and again.
Yeah.
That's just a distraction from what they want to do.
I think it was Stuart Russell in his latest book, Human Compatible, who one of the major ones in AI research.
Yeah.
He makes a connection between a very technical term, but well known to anyone in computer science or AI. It's utility function and utilitarian ethics.
Yeah.
So he seems to be saying that AI technology is biased. This is my translation of it. Is biased towards utilitarian ethics. Would you agree with that?
I think so. Again, like I said, also when I talked about our experiments of building cars to be ethical, the utilitarian ethics is a very computable ethics.
Yes.
You count stuff. And if you can count stuff, you can compute. So the whole idea of a computer is to build machines that count. And utilitarian is in machine. So you decide what you want to count, you count it, and then you see what is the biggest piece of amount of things in which pile they are. So that correlates directly with what a computer can do. At the ground. And the other types that we noticed that as well, that with the Kantian theory we still could make, with more steps we could make a correlation between what would mean to be how to compute, how to program Kantian ethics, but it got much more difficult when it got to virtue ethics and things like that, because then we miss the instruments to do it. So there, and of course, if once you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, like the. So once we have a computer, everything looks like it can be computed. And if you give us a theory that is computable by nature, then of course it's much easier to build things like that.
Yeah, so I was very pleased to see that you at least include and not just mention virtue ethics as part of the normative framework that you have to take care of in thinking about it. Stuart Russell says it's too difficult and just brushes it off. Yeah. I think it's too easy.
It's true. I mean, but again, engineers who build what we can build, and
yeah.
And I know Stuart very well. I actually work with him directly in many types of endeavors, including this global partnership on AI. But indeed, and some of the things he says are very. I like a lot what he does, and for the ones who don't know, Stuart Russell, he wrote the one which is still the main textbook on AI. So every student in the world that studies AI at mathematics or computer science level has read at one time or another the book that Stuart wrote. He has moved recently to a much more approach on the ethics, the impact, and so on. But one thing which he says is that we need to make sure that we build the machine to to the purpose that we really want it to be. So we have to make sure that we put in the machine the purpose that we really mean. He gives very often the example of the tale of King Midas. I suppose you know it, the one who, in which it didn't build this machine correctly enough, so then everything starts turning into gold, including his wife and his food and his children and so on. So Stuart really talks about we really need to make sure that we put the purpose in the machine is the purpose that we really mean, which is true. But the point is that if you build a machine for myself, I can still tell the machine what is the purpose that I mean. But once you build a machine which is supposed to be for all of us in this meeting or all of us in a certain place, then it's much more difficult to agree on what is the purpose that is shared by all of us. And that the meaning of that purpose is the same.
Be careful what you wish for.
Exactly, yeah.
So I think we should, I thank you very much for this discussion. I appreciate it.
Thank you
a lot. If we should finish in some maybe 10 minutes, I would give the possibility to all participants to ask some questions to Stefan and Virginia. Maybe I should ask one simple question to both of you that you, in this case, have to answer very quickly. And that is, if I am a student and interested in this subject, I'm not studying AI, what do you want me to take with me from this dialogue about AI and ethics? Is it possible to give a very short answer on that question? What is the main thing that you want to give a listener? And then we will go into these written questions or the questions asked by other participants. Will you start, Stefan?
I think be careful what you wish for is a good tag. But also be careful how you talk about AI. See through it and ask this extra question.
Thank you. And Virginia?
Yeah, I agree with Stefan. So understand that the power of words and the meaning, the words as they are used in the common AI narrative are often not the meaning of the words in a philosophical or in a common sense way. So intelligence is not intelligence like when people, artificial I think is still the one who holds correctly, but things like behavior or ethics or autonomy or agency are all, you need to really understand that the technical meaning of those type of words is in a sense much more narrow than the real meaning of those words.
Yes.
So an intelligent computer system is not intelligent like not even a cat or a dog.
Yes, thank you. Okay. So if you want to say one final thing, each of you, just 2 sentences, and then we thank both all participants in this event, and especially Virginia and Stefan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
So if I
could say something final if you want.
Just something final. I think what I would like to ask all of you is to participate in these discussions. Join the perspective from philosophy, the perspective from theology, the perspective from many different disciplines in the discussion about AI ethics and responsibility in AI. It's too important a discussion to be left to the engineers and the politicians. We really need to have the humanities perspective, the social science perspective in these discussions. And that's something which and I talk now for the engineers, we cannot do it alone. We really need the voice from all disciplines.
Thank you. Stefan?
Well, I would just voice that a sort of warm heart and a cool head. think clearly and see through the verbiage, all the language that is around. But there are certainly important philosophical and existential issues that are risen by this. I usually say that I don't know any time in the history of humanity when it's been so easy to, with anyone at any place, talk about the big issues. What's the meaning of life? And it's all due to AI. So that's just a great benefit for philosophers and theologians.